OPN launched just last year. So this project really aligns with OPN's policy priority on infrastructure, specifically supporting the expansion of processing livestock, aquaculture, and specialty crops across the state, including mobile processing options, which is what we're going to talk about today. So you can see my screen, right? Okay.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. So a little bit what we're going to talk about is we'll introduce, well, Amanda already introduced us, so we'll talk about the project a little bit, and then as well as framing the issue around meat processing. Then we're going to talk a little bit about a needs assessment that we did last year, as well as some site visits to some working mobile units, and talk a little bit about what we're doing with this project, about the findings, next steps. And then we want to have a Q&A session and really kind of learn from you all. That's some of the reasons why we're doing these type of talks, is not only to share information, but to get information from folks. And then we'll talk about some next steps for this project. And as Amanda mentioned, if you do have questions, just pop them in the Q&A box, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about those in a little bit. So this is our team. You heard about all of us, and then our other project partner that we're really happy to be working with is AceNet. So they've been helping us and providing support on the back end, as well as helping with some data analysis and writing some reports that we're going to be coming out with at the end of this project. So this group has been aware of the issues surrounding meat processing, the supply chain infrastructure. There's been some previous regional studies that have taken place. Back in 2009, there was a feasibility study in Ohio that Ohio State and Ohio Department of Agriculture completed, looking at poultry, mobile solutions for poultry processing. And then more recently, there has been some studies in Southern Ohio looking at meat processing infrastructure. So this is something that's just been going on for a while. And then as well as there's just been national news lately and interest specifically with USDA, as we've seen they're investing around $1 billion to expand meat and poultry processing capacity around the country. So really wanted to kind of dig into this, and this project is funded actually from USDA through a local food promotion program grant, and it's an 18-month planning project. And we're really focusing on Ohio and the Central Appalachia region for this project, but it is something that is replicable depending on the situation around the country. And as I mentioned, we are looking at red meat. There was a study done for poultry, but we were interested in red meat for this project. And if you're interested in learning more or just kind of following what we're doing, we do have a project website, which is listed there on the screen, and it's hosted by AceNet. So just wanted to take a step back for folks that may not be as interested, or not as interested, as aware of the issues that are surrounding meat processing and infrastructure in the supply chain. And we've had major consolidation within the industry over the decades. So if you take a look at the graph on the left, this is the meat processing industry revenue from 2002, which came in around $123.2 billion. And the market share of the largest two firms was around 21%. So you can see there's just ConAgra and Tyson. And then the rest other is just everybody else around the country, all the other processing facilities. And then you fast forward to 2018, and the industry revenue as a whole comes in around $217.7 billion. And now the market share of the largest four firms is 53% of the industry. So everybody else has dropped to around 43%. So we were seeing, fewer and fewer of those community mom and pop slaughter facilities, and we're seeing more large facilities that are processing just more of the animals in the country. So there are around 800 federally inspected slaughterhouses in the United States, and that number has decreased 70% since 1967. So in the US cattle industry, a little more than 50 plants are responsible for as much as 98% of slaughtering and processing. And then as of November 2020, 4 companies controlled 73% of America's beef processing capacity. 4 companies controlled 67% of America's pork processing capacity. And then 4 companies controlled 54% of America's chicken processing. So if you're interested in learning more about this topic, because there's a lot of information out there, take a look at Farm Action, and they used to be called Family Farm Action Alliance, but have since rebranded to Farm Action, and they are really the experts in market consolidation, specifically in the meat industry. And you'll see a link at the bottom of this slide to a recent report that they released titled The Food System Concentration and Its Impacts. So add on top of all of that, a global pandemic that we've been going through for the past 2 years. And that really highlighted the fragility in our food system, specifically when it comes to the meat processing industry. There's just been headlines about what's going on in this arena. We've had closures at slaughter plants because of coronavirus outbreaks, which wiped out 25% of pork processing capacity and 10% of beef processing in just April 2019 alone. In 1 week, the number of cattle slaughtered dropped 22% from the same period in the previous year, and hog slaughter was down 6%. Farmers were forced to euthanize over 800,000 hogs and 2 million chickens just because they could not get in for a processing date. And just as of May 2019, 101 meat packing and processing plants had confirmed cases of COVID-19, and at least 18 were forced to close. So it's taken decades to get where we are, and one solution is definitely not going to fix this problem, but we were just really interested in what we can do to make a difference in our region. So we wanted to ask some questions and see how other folks were feeling when taking a look at this topic. So we conducted a needs assessment survey, and the survey was distributed electronically from May 13th of 2021 to August 14th of 2021. And we received 231 responses. And in the survey, respondents were asked to identify as one role within the food supply chain, I guess. So either a consumer, a producer, or a processor. So we're going to look at some of these results here. So when we asked folks about what their primary role that they held, this is what we received. So 61.6% identified themselves as a consumer. And then we had 34.9% identifying as a producer and 3.4% identifying as a processor. And then so as we move through the needs assessment survey results, kind of keep this in mind, because folks were then asked questions based on the role that they identified as. But we were also just interested if, not everybody's not just a producer, you're also a producer and a consumer. So you could be multiple things. So we're just kind of interested in how people would identify given all the options. So this was kind of the breakdown of the folks when they were allowed to identify into different buckets. And then here was kind of the distribution on based on counties. So 50 counties were represented overall out of the 88 counties that we have here in Ohio. And Franklin, Athens, Tuscarawas, Ross, and Fairfield were our top 5 counties. We do also recognize that there are some weaknesses in the survey. So the questions we asked were qualitative in form. So we asked people for, like, if this were to happen, then what would you do? Estimate, forecasting, so that type of thing. We also had a lack of data on processors in Ohio. So the databases, there wasn't one big database of all of the current processors in Ohio. So you had to go to a bunch of different locations and do separate outreach. And so that information was a little bit difficult to get your hands on. We also had limited regulator responses. So we only had one regulator that took part in the survey, although throughout this project, we have had conversations with multiple regulators. So we do have their perspective that we've taken into consideration. And then most of the producers that responded were smaller scale. So even though we do have some challenges with the survey, we think that it does show there is a clear representation of need when we look at the survey results. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, and she's going to talk about the consumer side of the survey.
Hi, thanks to OFPN for having us. So I represented the viewpoint of consumers in our project because that's my primary role. As a person who lives in urban Franklin County, I'm not raising much of my own meat. And in talking to producers like Paul and other folks at farmers markets where I was sourcing meat, people were very quickly able to enlighten me on some of the challenges they felt, which as a person who cares about the source of my meat and the people who raise it, that was important to me. So in the project, we carefully considered the role of consumers because any infrastructure development would need to have demand to make an economically feasible model. So next slide, please. So like Angela said, consumers were actually our primary respondents. And we asked them, what does local mean to you? We had 132 unique responses to this question that Chris at AceNet helped us categorize into buckets. And primarily, folks define local as raised and processed within a region of Ohio. Some of them specified that by mileage, but also interestingly, a little over 20 of the responses were that local means knowing the farmer, and that's going to come up again. So in the next slide, another question that we asked is, what do you value about local meat? Again, trying to understand what the demand would be for any kind of development. And here the top answers are support local farmers, support the local economy, transparency in the food chain, and superior taste and personal relationship with the farmers. So again, none of those, well, there's not much specific to distance in that answer as far as what local is. The value is in the economy and in the relationships. So next slide. Because any infrastructure could have certification implications, we asked about that specifically. How important are the following certifications or practices? And locally raised and pasture raised were by far the strongest of the responses. And this we did ask, like, what was extremely important or not important at all. That those were the range of answers. So certified humane was somewhat important, and very interesting that certified organic and kosher were at the bottom, and a lot of folks ranked them as not important at all, actually. So next slide, please. Just to straight up assess the demand, we asked if more local red meat were available, how likely would you be to purchase it? And of 141 responses, 91% were very likely or likely. So there's a strong demand. Next slide. So takeaways, strong preference for local meat and the value behind it of supporting the farmers and the economies that are represented. There's preference for pasture-raised, non-GMO feed and grass-fed. The top barriers, which we didn't make a slide on, but have data from that assessment, barriers to purchasing more are high prices and the inconvenience of markets or access to them. And again, 91% of consumers likely or very likely to purchase more local red meat if it were available. So I'm going to turn it over now to Paul to talk about the producers.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you, as we've all said, to OFPN for hosting us. It really is a pleasure as someone who has, my boots on the ground out here in Chillicothe, to participate in a project like this, and also in a webinar type of series like this. I'm just very, very grateful to be here. And so thank you for everyone whose attention was drawn to this project. I was representing producers as we went through this survey. So let's talk about some of the data that we gathered from folks who identified primarily as producers. We asked some very obvious questions that you would expect, including how many animals do you send to market annually? And here are the results. Again, this survey was concentrating on red meat specifically. So beef, bison, hog, sheep, and goat were their options. And as you can see, as we kind of already mentioned, most of the producers trended to be in that smaller producer type of category, although we did have a couple of large hog producers at 100 plus and several on the higher end scale of things. So they were there, but predominantly skewed towards a smaller production systems. Next slide, please. We asked how many acres they currently utilize to raise these animals. As you can see, the highest value is somewhere in that 50 to 100 acre range. That fits very well in my comfort zone. My farm is 111 acres. So the average acreage over everybody, though, was 172. And interesting to me that we had, just from the producer side alone, we had 13,413 acres represented by the producers who took our survey. Slide, please. We asked about what type of management practices they currently follow. And as you can see, most of the producers that answered were either pasture raised or grass fed and finished type of operations. A few specifically identified non-GMO seed. Very few certified organic and certified naturally grown. That's actually, it mirrors what we talked about just now on the consumer side, but it's not actually exactly the same because in Ohio, if you aren't aware, we only have one certified organic processor in the entire state. So not at all surprising from a producer perspective to have low numbers who are certified naturally grown or certified organic, simply because there's not only a lack of processing overall, which we'll get to, but a lack specifically of organic processing options. Slide, please. So we asked the question, how impactful are the following barriers to the profitability of your farm? And these are not any ranking answers. I'll get to that in a second. But I show this slide because I wanted to show that we didn't game the system, right? Because in my mind, if I were watching a presentation like this, I would think like, oh, of course, all the processing surface to the top because that's the only answers people were given. But as you can see, we offered options, of course, about slaughter and processing, but also cost of certifications, land access challenges, compliance with food safety regulations. So they had plenty of options to choose from. And slide, please, and you'll see that in the end, though, what they did choose, the top three answers all have to do with the acknowledged bottleneck of processing and slaughter. So significant wait times was by far the highest ranked barrier to profitability. Distance to processors too far came in second, and right behind it, managing the logistics of multiple processors. And then you got into other types of answers like cost of certification and so forth. But as you can see, of the 6 that are identified here, 4 of the 6 are around processing issues, and the top 3 are all processing issues. So very, very striking consent that this is a real issue, and if you dare I say, the issue for producers in the area. Slide, please. So then obviously if we identify the issue and we're clear on that, the next question is, well, what if those processing barriers were reduced? Slide, please. And you can see this is the answer in a sense. This slide is a little bit confusing, but I keep it in here because I wanted to show everybody that we have this data for every red meat enterprise, so beef, lamb, pork, and etc. And Chris Quilk from AceNet, who's on this call, did an amazing job of helping us sort of get a handle on a lot of this data. But you can see that the blue is what they answered as their current beef to market question, and then without barriers is the red, and the change is in green. And my brain initially goes to, wait, the change is negative, so that means that what you're seeing as the change goes from negative to positive is essentially people shifting their answer from 1 to 9 to something else. And so I struggled with this a little bit. So this is the raw data, and we have this for all of them. But I created a way to sort of estimate this a little bit better by assigning those ranges a specific number. So this is very much estimated. We don't know if that 1 to 9 was 1 or 9, but I just said every 1 to 9 for answer gives a 1. Every 10 to 19 gets an 11. And so I was able to come up with hard numbers at that point and be able to do percentages and that kind of stuff. Again, very much estimated, but nonetheless, this gives you the answers that they gave in a format that's a little more palatable to me. in which now you can clearly see that the increase of what producers said that they would bring to market if those barriers were reduced. And that increase is anywhere from 45% for beef to 151% for bison, 57% for hog, and on and on and on. So the bottom line is producers have said, if those barriers to processing are reduced, we absolutely can and would bring more animals to market. Slide, please. So from a producer takeaway, again, we had mostly smaller scale producers represented, but the total acres, just over 13,000 acres and averaging 172 acres per respondent. Their current practices were pasture raised and grass fed and finished, a little bit of non-GMO is the third option, very few certifications. And again, just to hammer it home, the highest impact barriers reported, the top three, given a multitude of options, were all processor and slaughter oriented. And then, as we just said, most producers would send more animals to market with fewer barriers. All right, slide please, and we'll pass back to Angela for the infrastructure component.
Okay. So I was in charge of the infrastructure side of this. So I worked with processors around the state to get some information for this needs assessment survey. I did reach out to over 300 processing facilities throughout Ohio. I used the Ohio Department of Agriculture and Ohio Association of Meat Processors data sets, but some were out of date, processors had gone out of business, and some had limited contact information. So out of all of the outreach that was done, we did receive 8 responses from processors. So that is a little bit of an issue for this survey, but we did still get some information. So we were interested in the processing services that were offered from those that did respond. And as you can see, we have slaughter, custom cut, value-added processing, a retail storefront, inspection regulation, and cold storage. And then we were curious in what species and how many were processed weekly. So as you can see, the processors that did respond were on the smaller side. So we did have two that had 20 to 29 beef per week, but everybody else was in the 1 to 9 or 10 to 19 range. So we were also interested for the processor side, what are the barriers that prevent them from serving more clients in the region? And no surprise that they're operating at full capacity and lack of skilled labor to really operate. And we're going to talk a little bit about the site visits that we took last year, and it'll also highlight these as the top issues as well for those facilities. So some other issues were seasonal variability, and one of the processors was just starting and not yet operating at full capacity. So we offered some potential solutions to the processing bottleneck, again, asking in their region. We know we're not solving problems on a national scale, but just in their opinion, in their region, how impactful would the following potential solutions be to the processing bottleneck. And as you can see, mobile slaughter for red meat and collaborative cold storage were at the top of the list. Another mobile slaughter for poultry was in there as well. And then cooperative farmer value-added product line, collaborative marketing brand. And then as we saw with producers and consumers, certified organic made the bottom of this list as well. We were a little concerned that maybe processors would see the introduction of another facility or unit as competition in the area. But when we asked the question of how they would view the introduction of a mobile unit, most were either indifferent, it wouldn't impact their business at all, or that they saw it as a positive, it would increase their business due to increased slaughter capacity. And it would also be a good option for producers that don't want to travel as far with their livestock. So nobody saw it as a negative, that it would decrease their business or be competition. So just the takeaways for processors. I mean, we did have a limited response rate, which was an issue, but these folks are busy. They're operating at full capacity. They have a lack of employees and skilled labor. Seasonal variability isn't as big of an issue as we might have thought with the folks that are currently in operation. No processor considered the introduction of a mobile unit as a negative, which is great. And they do see that mobile slaughter would be an impactful solution in addition to collaborative cold storage as a secondary. So we did ask some questions. So these were all questions based on how the person identified in the survey, consumer, producer, processor. And then we asked some questions for all respondents. So everybody got these questions. We were just interested again, this is an opinion, would a mobile red meat slaughter unit alleviate the processing bottleneck in the region? And 67.2% answered yes, or were somewhat supportive. So the folks that said yes, they said it would increase access, lessen travel and distance for farmers and animals. It would reduce time barriers, and it would alleviate booking challenges. So for the folks that weren't sure, they were just unsure if mobile would help, and that slaughter staffing issues would most likely remain the same, whether it was a mobile unit or a brick and mortar. And then also capacity questions, like how much could a mobile unit actually support? And then the negative reasons, or the folks that said no, it was interesting. They were thinking that maybe COVID was a special situation, so that the reason that we're seeing this type of bottleneck in the meat processing industry is because of COVID, and that once that was gone, this would go away as well. There might be a lack of demand for a mobile unit, and would a mobile unit have the volume to really make an impact? And then we asked also everybody if they would have concerns about a mobile red meat unit in the region. So 53.6 said no, or unsure. Of those who expressed concern, there were some processing concerns, like how would you handle hang time, sanitization of a unit, is it humane, what's the cost of a unit, and would it be actually cost effective? There'll still be some labor issues. There were also some structural concerns, so issues with zoning, or what do you do with wastewater? How would you handle cold storage? And then some geographical concerns, so like what kind of area would this actually serve? But overall, we do see that there is a need for more processing, convenient, affordable. There is a high demand for local and pasture-raised meat from consumers. There is a desire for humane, farmer-centered collaborations, and everybody in all three categories saw mobile as a solution, as well as shared cold storage. So I'm going to turn it now back over to Rachel, and she's going to talk a little bit about our visits to some working mobile units around the country.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, so we know as farmers and educators that seeing something with your own eyes has a ton of value. So we were able to visit both the newest and the oldest mobile units operating in the US, as far as we know. So next slide. So we started with the newest, the one that was actually under construction and not operational. In September of 2021, we visited the Bay Area Ranchers Co-op, which is in Marin County, California. And they designed this system that you see a few pictures of here out of a unique motivation where there was, it's a ranching area with a lot of acreage, and a lot of farmers move cattle across a fair amount of acreage, but they had basically one processor in a large region. And it actually had a scandalous, I don't remember all the details and non-important, but they had a situation where that processor ended up being shut down. And so then they were left with many of the ranchers traveling more than 5 hours one way to take their animals to a processor, which is obviously not good for the animals, not feasible for the farmers. So they were strongly motivated to get together Cooperative and build a processor themselves. As it turns out, in Marin County, a brick and mortar slaughterhouse is not allowed by county zoning. And so they were motivated, they had to choose mobile because that was allowed on a temporary zoning permit. So they built this permanent docking station, which has, as you can see, animal handling that was designed by Temple Grandin. They really, because it's a farmer-driven co-op, farmer-owned co-op, they thought like farmers and designed things like pull-through driveways, so that, you know, there wasn't trailer backup issues, things like that. And then the mobile unit is stationary, adjacent and under this this animal handling area. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things that apply to both the units and are things that any mobile unit would have to consider. First is water. This unit and the other one we saw have hot, clean, tested water on the unit for doing rinsing, but then there's a wastewater issue, and especially in California, other areas where there's water rights issues, mobile units have to be considerate of this. In this case, the water was drained into off-site or into big containers that were collected to filter out any kind of fats and offal, and get dumped and pumped and dumped elsewhere. The waste, the offal waste also went into a handling or a container unit. And then the offal that could be potentially used was moved off of the mobile unit into a cold storage container. So you can't see in this picture, but they also had some parked stationary cold storage containers. The co-op is made up of about 30 farmer members, as I recall. And they were going to have 2 employees in the unit, both HACCP certified, and employ a part-time driver and a logistical coordinator. So everything, the live animal would come to this unit by the farmer, get processed in the mobile unit, and then the meat and products that could be sold, like hides potentially, stored in a cold storage container that would then be delivered to different packing plants of the farmer's choosing. A question that comes up and came up for us is like, what is the capacity of a mobile unit? This unit and the other one can hold approximately 30 halves or 50 head of cattle, which could be you could substitute hogs, 30 hogs, and about 6 to 8 lamb equal a half of beef in terms of the storage capacity. And that becomes important in terms of throughput, because these units cost a lot, operating a facility costs a lot, and so you want to maximize that, but you're also limited obviously by the capacity of the unit. So then we went to the Island Grown Farmers Co-op, the oldest unit that's operating in the US. They began in 2000, excuse me. And actually this truck that you see right here on the left is their first unit, and it's still in operation. That's the one that we witnessed. Their co-op is much larger. It's a 80 to 100 member co-op, and 4 to 5 of those farmers use the mobile unit on a regular basis, on a weekly basis. And then many more of them are less regular, maybe a monthly basis, and they have a few that just process once or twice a year. They're located in the Washington State San Juan Island area, off of Puget Sound. And their motivation for a mobile unit was based on geography. The various islands had farmers who were raising animals, but they often would have to be transported over ferries, which has a lot of challenge involved in terms of the amount of time that an animal might spend in transport and the amount of time that the farmer would spend, in addition to cost of the ferry ride. So the mobile unit actually travels via ferry to different islands at different times to be on site on the farms and do the slaughter there. So after the slaughter, then the mobile unit returns to a brick and mortar processing facility that the co-op also owns. And they are able then to process for farmers. Farmers pick up from there and take to their markets. So again, this unit has the same maximum capacity, but because it was operational, we were able to ask, how many cattle are you actually able to process or to slaughter in a single day? And their maximum with 2 people working on the unit is about 11 beef per day, 45 to 55 minutes per head. And that is on a very good, efficient, smooth day, a perfect day. The day that we watched it, or that we were there, I believe they made it through 6 cattle and then some hogs. So that's another consideration for the feasibility of such a unit is how much is the actual capacity. Visiting this mobile unit helped us understand what the on-farm needs were for such a slaughter, which means that on the farm, without that stationary animal holding area, like we saw in Bay Area, Barcy Co-op, each farm that's a member of Island Grown has to have animal restraints and handling on their farm. They also have to comply with their local waste handling. In this case, the Three Sisters farm that we visited they were able to compost the offal. Amazing. Paul and I were into that. That's a pretty cool thing that they were able to keep that on the farm and then use that material in their farming later. But that might not be applicable to all locations. I mean, in fact, we know it's not applicable to many in Ohio, for instance. It was great to hear that organic is no big deal to these folks. They do organic processing, and as the slaughterman said, we're keeping so many records of so many things. It's basically just another box and another little system of records to audit. So that is a possibility with a mobile unit for sure. And we also got to talk to a USDA inspector during this site visit. The mobile units have to have a USDA inspector on site, just like they would if they were brick and mortar. And this inspector was very happy to share with us about how she sees the mobile unit working, was very positive. Noticed that in animal handling, which is a primary concern for these inspectors, that keeping the animals on farm seems to correlate with a lower stress, and that she doesn't notice as many problems there with that. The USDA inspector obviously is concerned with sanitization as well, and does temp checks of the water and makes sure that they're being sprayed down, does a pre-check, at the beginning of the day. And all of that is totally possible and doable on a mobile unit, no problems. And she also said that the inspector job was really sought after. So and the slaughtermen at the Island Farm, Island Grown Co-op also reflected that in some ways this was a more preferable job to a brick and mortar, because they get to be on the farm. They're engaging with farmers more than just the physical act of handling the meat, and they're able to see a process through from start to finish a little bit more. So next slide, we'll do just the takeaways here. What we realized putting these 2 pieces together is that the patchwork of regulations make a uniform SOP very difficult for a mobile unit. So each site is going to have their own challenges. There's definitely an advantage to a co-op structure for a mobile unit. We could talk a lot more about that in a different talk, I suppose, but we did ask a lot of questions about the cooperative nature of these organizations. The infrastructure requirements are higher with a mobile unit to the individual farmer. They have to have those restraints, they have to have water access, they have to have a waste stream. The USDA, one of our questions is Paul's going to get into is about inspection, but the USDA inspected unit doesn't have anything to do with the state regulator, at least in Washington and California. And again, certified organic, no big deal. So it's possible on a mobile unit. And with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll take back up and just, so now as we're wrapping up this project, we're loosely calling these findings, although I hesitate to use the word exactly right, because this is still an ongoing project. The feasibility portion of the study is still getting written as we speak. We'll call them findings or at least initial, and then, but this is kind of where the project finds itself and is headed. So I kind of organize them, if you will, into several different buckets. The first of which is discussing exactly what Rachel alluded to, that idea of inspection or regionality, because at the beginning, this project started with an incorrect assumption. We were told repeatedly by a multitude of folks who would know that you cannot do mobile slaughter in Ohio. You just can't. You can't. It's not allowed. It's not allowed. And that premise is what really generated this project. And as it turns out, that premise is completely false. We finally got to the core of the issue and talked to Mr. Smeller at ODA, and his answer was like, no, you can totally do that. It's legal. It just has to be inspected by either ODA or USDA. So there's nothing in ODA's inspection code that prevents mobile slaughter in Ohio. So once we got to that solution, we were like, well, now what? And so we really sort of turned the rest of the project into, okay, cool, let's get as smart as we can on what this possibilities exist, what the challenges are, and try to share that with somebody in Ohio or the Appalachian regions that surround our state, who would be considering the possibility of engaging in a mobile slaughter unit. So just some notes along those lines then, because you can either have it ODA or USDA inspected. If you choose to be USDA inspected, then obviously that overrides for where it's not quite the right word, any ODA inspection. So if you are USDA inspected, then you are allowed to sell across state line. ODA doesn't have anything to do with that. However, Ohio is also one of 9 states that is part of the Cooperative Interstate Shipment Program, which allows ODA inspected facilities who have this additional qualification or inspection to act in a sense as USDA inspected facilities. So those products that come through an ODA CIS inspected slaughter facility are allowed to sell across state lines as well. And currently there are 9 states, as I mentioned, in that CIS program. Slide, please. So I have to be honest, when I went into this project, I really was hoping that the results would find that the mobile works. It's just the silver bullet that's going to solve all the problems regarding processing and slaughter limitations. And we're everybody's, it's just gonna be this big happy family. While portions of my hopes are true, and I'll get to those in a minute, I have to be honest and present the fact that mobile offers a fair amount of challenges as well. As Rachel mentioned, the farms need some extra level of infrastructure, whether that's handling facilities. I mean, we almost always have, if you have animals, then you're going to have some sort of alleyway and chute system, but probably doesn't have the ability to release that animal after it's killed and then move it into the processing and skinning kind of areas. They obviously have to deal with offal and wastewater issues. And so there is an additional need for some amount of infrastructure to make a mobile unit where you're slaughtering the animal out on the farm feasible. In addition, let's just be honest, the farmers are busy. So this idea of getting farmers together in order to gain momentum around a cooperative structure of some sort would be very, very difficult to secure. Not impossible, but just difficult. And there is a layer of logistics that requires some amount of extra management. Both of the site visits that we did had somebody that specifically their job was to manage those kind of logistics and scheduling concepts. And we really, we heard loud and clear that this idea, which again, my preconceived notion going into it was this idea that a mobile unit could skip and hop across the countryside and slaughter a hog over here and a cattle over here, and then go to the next farm. But the reality, the business side of that, is that that's not the case, and especially as it pertains to the inspector time, which really was the limitation. And I said, again, all the folks that are doing it said you theoretically can do that, but you absolutely should not do that. In order to, you really need one location per day, perhaps multiple farms bringing animals to that one farm to meet your throughput needs, and you're really trying to capitalize on and take advantage of those full inspector hours that are available to you. And then, so you've got carcasses hanging on a trailer at the end of the day. That's wonderful, but then you still need that sort of follow-on cold storage and further processing and packaging streams. So mobile, whereas in Ohio at least, we kind of have all that in a brick and mortar. Everything's all right there, close together. Mobile adds a challenge of what do you do with those carcasses? How do you get them off the trailer and move them into a cold storage and processing streams from there? And as we mentioned, so there are no current operating mobile units in Ohio. So we have a lack of successful examples in the region. We had to go to the West Coast to find the two that we did. There are some in between, but in Ohio, specifically in the Appalachian regions, we just don't have any successful examples to point to learn from, to get best practices from. And that's really what this project is starting to try and to meet that need to a certain degree. And as we mentioned as well, mobile still requires an inspector on site. It's fully, all the rules are still in place. You still need people to show up and kill and slaughter animals in order to turn them into meat. So mobile doesn't change that reality, and so you still have the issues of employee retention and inspector workload type of concepts that mobile does not meet. Unless, so moving to the next slide, please. One of the possibilities is that, and Rachel kind of mentioned it, the inspector and the folks working on the trucks all agreed that this was far more beneficial and far more desirable to them than operating out of a brick and mortar or a large plant or something along those lines. So while it doesn't specifically address the manpower type of issues, I think that from a possibilities perspective, as you can see on that third bullet, that preferential idea, that fact that inspector's job was sought after, and if, as soon as she was going to retire, there's somebody that's ready to take that spot because they want to do this, and that's different in their opinion than working in a brick and mortar facility. So maybe it does in some indirect way have an option to sort of answer some of those manpower issues. Skipping back to the top though, so again, these are some of the possibilities that mobile does offer solutions for, and we found that they were most successful when they were being used as a tool to solve a specific problem, whether that be geography, distance to processing, zoning issues, land use kind of concepts. So mobile really shown as a intentional solution to a problem. We also believe that mobile has a possibility as sort of a test business, if you will. While the investment costs are not insignificant in any way, somewhere around $250,000 for a unit, that's still exponentially less than trying to buy an existing processing facility or start one from scratch and build it out from a brick and mortar perspective. In addition, if for some reason the business doesn't work, you still have sort of a unit that you can then sell down the road, as just like buying a car and then selling it used kind of concept. So as opposed to you're paying rent on someplace that you bought. So possibility of offering some options for somebody to test or start up a business in any sort of region. And that's there's lots of money that's being pointed, for lack of a better word, at processing issues right now, both from a government, from a national level and a state level, which is wonderful. And mobile is a little bit shiny and sexy, and so there is this sort of idea of innovation demand that could draw investment potential and attention to a solution like mobile, as opposed to sort of a regular solution. So certainly worth recognizing that. And at the the last bullet there, talking about scalability, that's another one where mobile really shines. So you have a unit that's operating, you get that sort of starting test business up, and now once it's running at capacity, you can easily expand by buying another unit. As opposed to, again, that sort of idea where your property boundaries are what they are, expansion capability with a brick and mortar, while not impossible, is less flexible and less scalable. And then finally, and this is the last bullet, but the most important to me, we're going to go into this a little more detail on the next slide, which is that there's some very real possibilities that need to be explored regarding carcass quality and humane slaughter as a mandate, both from a consumer and a producer perspective. We're all on the same page that we want, if we're going to eat meat, we want it to be done right and done well. And mobile, I believe, offers the most compelling possibilities in that regard. Slide, please. So talking about the carcass quality, this isn't something that we don't know anything about. We corporate producers, processors, we know a relative wealth of information about the effects of stress on the carcass quality. And this goes all the way back to Temple Grandin's designs for animal handling facilities. That whole thing that she did, which was wonderful, it was all based on this idea of removing and reducing stress on the animal as much as possible. There are studies after studies after studies out there. If you start looking, I've looked and read through them, and they're from everywhere, from Mexico, Sweden, Serbia, and China, all across the world, talking about the effects of stress on animals, and then that and animal handling, in an effort to eliminate DFD meat, which aka dark cutters, if you will. Unfortunately, most of the studies look like this slide here. So there's a lot of really geeky scientific information about the effects of stress on carcass quality as it pertains to handling. Now, next slide. What we're missing truly, though, is this concept being fully applied to a transport issue, which is where, again, mobile, instead of that animal getting on a trailer and being transported to a processor, the mobile unit comes to the farm. And so nobody's really applying this sort of concept of animal handling cortisol stress issues to the process, to the transporting piece. Honestly, because most of the time we probably view it as non-negotiable. Like, why bother even applying it to that transport? Because somebody has to move the animals from here to there. Mobile challenges that assumption. So we talk about, from a producer perspective, there's percentages of shrink, 1% per hour of transport. So if they're taking a 6-hour drive, that's 6% of your overall weight per animal that you're going to lose. But we just kind of account it for it as just a cost of doing business, and that's doesn't have to be the case, especially as it pertains to mobile slaughter. There's absolutely, as we saw in our slides, and then I hope that this isn't news to anybody here in this group, that there's a consumer mandate for humane slaughter that is continuing to grow. It's not going away. It shouldn't go away. And producers, all of us are, we want to do what's right and what's best for the animal. And so this mandate for humane animal slaughter is going to just continue to grow. And so ultimately, from a humane slaughter perspective, the financial benefits are mostly unexplored or unquantified. So there's, this list here, you can see the shock of driving, injuries, fatigue, wait time, the list goes on and on and on of the possible negatives to the humane aspects of slaughter, as well as the financial bottom line for farmers that mobile slaughter can and possibly address. Slide, please. So that was a lot, and we're now to the point of our presentation that's my favorite part, in which we stop talking and we start listening. So in just a second, I won't leave the slide up here for a moment, but then I'm going to have Angela stop sharing so I can see your faces, and I'll lead this portion of the presentation. But we want to hear from you. We want to hear what we missed, what really spoke to you, what possibilities you see, what challenges do you see, what's happening around you that you're aware of. Just really looking forward to talking about that and capturing what you have to say. If you want to throw flowers, that's fine. We'll take it. But I have a saying in the military, you know how that thing where someone starts talking and you're listening and you're immediately in the back of your head start thinking about, yeah, but, and we call that sharpening the spears. So as we've talked over the last 40 minutes or so, I have no doubt that you guys have sharpened some spears, and this is your time to throw them. I want to hear it. I want to receive all of that information so that we can make sure that what we are ultimately producing benefits everybody to the best extent we can. So with that said, Angela, would you please stop sharing? And we will use the chat function if that's preferable to you. That's totally fine. Amanda's going to manage that, I believe. And then we also have the hand raise feature within Zoom as well. So feel free to let them fly.
So I went ahead and I gave everybody permission to talk. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, you can ask questions directly. Chris, you're the only person that's using an outdated version of Zoom. So I'm going to promote you to panelist so that you can unmute yourself if you choose to. And then if I go into the chat box, I think that, I don't think this question got covered yet, but it says, do you know how many of these mobile units exist in the United States? And are they more popular on the West Coast?
So I'll take that. I tried to answer that with the niche meat processing assistance network. Does have a listing of mobile units, and I believe they have 10 currently listed, most of which are in Washington, California, the Western United States. However, there are units that we're aware of that aren't on that list. So I don't think it's highly accurate, but it's a start. So folks could look there if they're looking for models, and right to mention also that there are a lot of other resources about mobile processing and small slaughter units and projects on that niche meat processing.org.
And I put a link in the chat to what Rachel was referring to. So it has it broken down by poultry units and red meat units with a link to all of them for more information. Although some of the links are broken, so not sure when it was last updated.
And thanks, Debbie, for mentioning. I wasn't aware of that, but there may be a unit operating in Orient.
And then Nick, to address your question, the presentation will be available. It is recorded, so it usually takes me a day or two to get that up. But if you are on our listserv, you'll see it come out through there probably by Monday. And then I know it looks like Robbie from the USDA had mentioned that he can speak a little bit to some of the funding that might be available for mobile processing units. So Robbie, if you're still on and you want to do that, you can feel free to unmute yourself and share.
Well, I was going to say good morning, everybody, but it might be afternoon for some. Just want to say with the USDA Rural Development, we have not exactly used it. We have been in discussions before with entities to use a rural business development grant. A lot of times what we get into is the applicant needs to be eligible and it has to assist rural small businesses. So how it could be done is the eligible applicants can be institutes of higher learning, nonprofits, but sometimes that in itself, it cannot be a for-profit business that applies, but it has to assist a rural small business, which it could be that these farmers are the ones it's assisting. And it's kind of hard to speak to how much we would have because there is a maximum for the program, but then the states are also allowed to develop their own maximums so they can distribute the funds throughout their state. We had been in discussions with an institution here I'm located in Kentucky, and they have 2 mobile units. One is poultry and one is jam and jelly. And like the gentleman, Paul mentioned, there are a lot of hoops to go through and some issues, as one of which in the state of Kentucky is every single county's health department is different. So the size of the pipe that you need to get rid of the wastewater. Could be 4 inches one county, could be 6 in another. So there are a lot of challenges, but I just wanted to let people know that there is possibly funding for this. I can't speak to exactly how much in every state. So I did give my email address in the chat to the host because I wasn't sure if they wanted me to speak, but I'd be happy to field any questions if people have it later on, to not take up much time here.
Awesome. Thank you, Robbie. I appreciate that. I have one question for you before I let you go. So one of the comments that I made was sort of the possibility of a mobile's unit would offer is this idea of innovation demand, the sort of a shiny, new, exciting option to address slaughter. If you are able, would you comment as to whether you, in your experience, you would agree with that, or whether that it would be an inaccurate statement to make for me?
That if the mobile unit works, is that what you're asking? I'm sorry.
Just in general, whether folks, whether it's rural development or others, would be more likely to entertain the option of supporting a slaughter solution that involved mobile over sort of a traditional method.
I would like to say that rural development would entertain any idea that helps farmers, ranchers, ag community. So whether it's mobile or whether it's could be brick or mortar. And one of the things, the reason why a mobile unit could be because it allows for equipment as an eligible expense, where building a processing unit under that grant does not allow for, say, construction of brick and mortar. But we also have a food supply chain loan that maybe assists for a mobile or a brick and mortar processor. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am, it does. Thank you so much, Robbie. Appreciate you.
No
Debbie, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I wanted to add in a little bit of historical perspective of how that rural business development grant had been looked at for the processing unit that was down in Orient. That started probably 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when we were having trouble finding organic poultry processing. So the push at that point was poultry processing. So it's a little bit different in how it operates. The ODA at that point, it wasn't on the table as far as mobile processing, but they were willing to entertain it as a test pilot. We just needed to find a nonprofit that would be willing to own and manage the unit itself, and then the grant funds could be used to do that. Obviously, with the passage of time, the cost of it has gone up, and you can still, that farmers could create a cooperative as long as the cooperative is organized under the state statute 1729, which is the nonprofit cooperative statute. A worker co-op, I'm not sure whether the worker co-op could be constructed that way or not. But Ohio recognizes cooperatives as nonprofits, so they would be eligible for the RBEG based on how Ohio statute works. You could also, and right now USDA also has a loan program out there for meat processing facilities. It's a little bit more tenuous. The hoops are a little bit higher, but it is out there, and it is intended to be something that focuses on how to alleviate the bottlenecks that are currently in the slaughtering arena. And looking at the bottleneck for cold storage, you may want to also look at Farm Services program for loan and grant program for cold storage facilities.
Yep.
That can be built on farm.
Wonderful.
And if you want contact, if you want information as far as further on those, I'd be happy to get that to you.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, baby. Anyone else? I've got an alarm set for 1:25, so that's still 14 minutes away. This will be fun. We can start calling people randomly and see if you're actually there and paying attention, or whether you're off doing something else. I like this game.
That caused people to get off the line.
It did. Somebody
That's
like came
scary.
up quick.
Yeah.
All right. I really will call on somebody unless someone else has an answer.
Oh. Is Josh unmuted?
Josh, yes, I see that unmuting. Do you have something?
If
Okay,
not,
you got it.
Robbie's
Okay.
hand is raised again.
All right, so Josh, we'll come back to you. I see your messaging there. Yes, ma'am, Robbie.
I just reiterate, well, I don't know about reiterate, but if anyone has any funding opportunities or, funding needs, I highly recommend that you reach out to your USDA rural development person in your state. If you can't find them, just email me. I'll be happy to do that, because we not only help businesses, but we do, community facilities. So there may be a way to help you fund something. So thanks for the time.
Yeah, thank you. Josh, you get your mic figured out?
I hope so. How does it sound?
Oh yeah, I got
Gotcha.
you loud and clear.
Awesome. So one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is whether or not these can be moved very quickly to accommodate slaughter of poultry. One of the gaps that we have in emergency management is the highly infectious avian flus. And if we need to do massive depopulation, much of that needs to be done on site. Certain regulations, you can't move the poultry. How would this, if at all, be able to supplement that? Would they be able to come in and help with slaughter and putting down the infected flock, or would we still be using quote unquote traditional methods like the carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide and the other chemical options that are available?
Yeah, so I think the answer to your question at a very, very basic level is yes. The bottom line is that whether it's a poultry unit or red meat, which those two are actually totally different, the processing requirements are unique to those. So it would need to be a mobile unit that was specifically set up for poultry. But that being said, I mean, the thing is literally a trailer behind a truck. So is that a possibility? I believe so. Some of the conversations we've already had where and maybe from an emergency management perspective, some of these things are sort of trumped, if you will, by the requirements. So you would know better than I in that, but whether specific county regulations for slaughter and so forth would have to continue to be followed. So that's certainly something to think about. That idea of waste management streams and so forth doesn't go away, but it sounds like that the imperative to do something about it might either remove or mitigate some of those kind of limitations that we would have with a mobile slaughter unit. So I that's my 2 cents to the idea is from what I understand, I think yes. Does anyone else have a Angela or Rachel?
Yeah, my only thought is like if this was owned by, say, a farmer co-op, there would have to be an economic incentive to do so. And so if we're talking about an emergency situation where the meat couldn't be sold, then I'm not sure what the incentive would be there. And then I had the local regulation thought too, that while you could get the unit anywhere, operating it would require compliance, presumably unless there is some emergency, alleviation of those compliances. It's an interesting thought, though.
Actually, that is what stopped the progress of the mobile poultry unit that ended up being a permanent fixture at Orient. Was after we had everything lined up, avian flu hit, and that became, you're not going to go on to other people's farms. They won't permit it. So just, I don't know whether that thought process has changed, but at that point, they did not want anything moving from one farm to another if there was an infected farm.
So to clarify that one, so they stopped that from moving around farm to farm after there was an issue with avian flu, just to
When,
not
well,
spread.
when avian flu hit the US, was about the time that we were getting ready to start full-fledged. We had someone that was interested in moving forward with that. The prison system said they would be willing to deal with the offal and those kinds of issues, the wastewater and that, and be able to drive it from farm to farm. When avian flu hit, because of how highly infectious that is, ODA was no longer real excited about it going from farm to farm. The poultry producers were also not very excited about going from farm to farm, because you don't know who has it, and that it's one of those, very quick start to finish kind of deals. You've got it, and 2 days later, it's a mess. So that was that was one of the things that stopped it. And I would be very surprised if that thought process has changed much since then, because it's still limited as to what you can do for it.
I'm wondering though, Debbie and Josh, feel free to weigh in, again, without any expertise in this specific issue. How is that different than bringing a contaminated flock to a brick and mortar? And would you not have, in that scenario, did they not have the same type of issues? Where, what was their answer then? And wouldn't it be the same answer to sanitize essentially a mobile unit and then move it along, as opposed to sanitizing a brick and mortar after an infected flock came through to process?
My understanding is they have to be destroyed and disposed of on site.
Yeah.
My question was more if they could just help with the euthanasia side of it and the animal destruction.
So yeah, perhaps then, to Debbie's point, you would then add an additional sort of or question associated with something else going on that farm and then going out to someone else's flock to slaughter.
Right. A bit like when you see your vet out there washing his boots like crazy, that's kind of the same thought process.
Right. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Josh. Did we address that question to your satisfaction?
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your interest. Okay, that was great. 6 more minutes.
I'm gonna say the list has whittled down quite a bit.
Oh, that's very sad. Jennifer.
I had to step away from my desk for a bit, so I apologize if I missed an answer to this question already. But have you spoken with any brick and mortar processors about their, if they would want to be involved in the further processing of animals that were slaughtered in a mobile unit? Because a side of beef doesn't really do me any good unless I can put ground and steaks in my retail case. I'm at the Green Acres Foundation, and we have a brick and mortar farm market here. So value added processing is very important to us. So I'm just curious if you've done any research, and I would find it very hard to believe that if I brought sides to my regular processor that they would be willing to do anything with it.
Angela.
I guess just a clarifying question. So you're just saying, like, if a farmer used the mobile unit for slaughter and then just brought
right, what's the farmer supposed to do with it after that?
Yeah, so that was interesting with conversations we had when we were in California, because their slaughter and processing are all separate. So there isn't a facility that does both. So they have to have slaughter, and then they take the meat that comes from the unit to the processor of their choosing. So it was an interesting, like, wheel and spoke type of situation. So it wouldn't be beneficial for a processor to just do the processing and not the slaughter, is the question or the issue?
I'm not aware of anywhere that I could take sides and have them further fabricated in Ohio, because the processors that we work with, they do all of it from end to end. And then if I take it to, say, my local butcher shop, and they could perhaps break it down for me, they're not going to have the capability to do that USDA labeling and have all my 100% grass-fed and finished label claims on there, because that's part of the inspections process. So that part of, like, I'm very interested in the mobile slaughter route because of the bottleneck of processing spots, but I feel like the back end of that for a small producer of getting it to a consumer in a way that's packaged and labeled that the consumers would expect would be fairly difficult. It might impede the growth or starting of mobile unit processing in Ohio unless we had a back end solution to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was one of the sort of difficulties, is the fact that you can take care of that initial front end piece, but then still have to have the follow on, whether that is facilitated by an existing brick and mortar within their expansion of cold storage options, or and then processing piece. But then there's still those manpower type of issues that you have to create more meat. You would need to solve that problem, and mobile doesn't solve it, and especially in Ohio, sort of almost creates it. Chris, do you have a comment from an AceNet's perspective on that sort of follow-on piece?
Yeah, so AceNet operates a cut and wrap facility that is a meat processing establishment with ODA in the state of Ohio in Nelsonville. And it seems like for a slaughter-based MPU to function in the state of Ohio, it would need to have an established relationship with a cut and wrap facility for that value-added processing, because I agree, a hanging side of beef is not really going to make it to the end consumer. There are other strategies, but a lot of the processing plants that we had respond to the survey had indicated that they struggle with the workforce access that we know exists in this industry, as well as already being scheduled to capacity. So one of the more interesting elements of their businesses related to the MPU is their presence of hanging cooler space. And because of the absence of good collaborative cold storage in our region, that's kind of one of those struggle points to get the MPU happening is where would it unload to? And then is there the potential within that establishment to do the value added processing to allow the type of labeling that we know consumers are looking for?
Well, I'm also thinking of another example of, so there's the butcher grocer in Grandview here in Columbus, and they partner with farms. And so one of the partnerships they had was with Fox Hollow Farm, where they wanted whole lambs. They don't do the slaughter, but they wanted to do the butchering. So they would have whole lambs delivered once they were slaughtered to the butcher grocer, and then they would further process them and deliver them to the consumer. So I'm wondering if, there probably aren't a lot of facilities that currently exist under that model, but could, if there was something like this that would allow it. So I guess further conversations. Yeah.
Absolutely, and a lot of the money that's available now, and as I'm looking at my clock, I'll take the mic and keep it for the remainder. But a lot of the money had to do with flowing towards existing operations. You had to be in business and that kind of stuff. So that is this one area where potentially an existing brick and mortar place could use some of those funds to expand cold storage and processing kind of concepts in order to serve a mobile unit, if somebody was able to sort of think that through and get going with it. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's 1:25, which was my cutoff. So thank you so much for that conversation. I can't thank you enough for your input. It's truly, truly valuable. Angela, do you want to go back to sharing your screen for the final couple? And this was really just a sort of what's next for us as far as this project is concerned. So I'll wait for that. Thank you. This project is wrapping up. It was just an 18-month planning grant, so we're looking forward to what the next steps might be from either us or someone else. We're in the midst of building some fact sheets around what we found and what we want to share with folks, both in terms of like general ideas as well as trying to really gather those best practices and share them with folks who would consider the possibility of starting a mobile meat unit here in Ohio. AceNet, Chris and others are building a cooperative business and financial plan as we speak. About to be dropped into the chat is an email list. If you'd like to receive any of that information or keep in contact with us, you can sign up for this email list, and we've been sending out information about the project and our findings via that email list. Next slide, which I think is the last one. So yeah, again, just a good reminder to say thank you from SDU sincerely. And Amanda, I'll turn it over to you for any wrap up you've got.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. So just a reminder, this session was recorded. So we will put this onto our YouTube channel, and I will send the recording out through the Ohio Food Policy Network listserv. If you're not on that listserv, I had posted it in the chat. I'll go ahead and throw that in there again. Give me a second. And you can sign up for that if you are not already a member of that listserv. And then just a special thanks to Paul, Angela, and Rachel. It's not often that we get this kind of engagement from farmers because we know how busy they are. So this is definitely a special treat for us. So thank you. And then I guess, our next session will be in April, and I believe that will be our presentation for the Farm Bill. So you'll see information for that come out through the listserv as well. And that's kind of all I had. So thanks again, and everybody have a good day.
Thank you.